What is the best get fucked Karen experience you've ever had? Story 1. My brother held the door for a pair of older women walking into a store behind us. One of them screamed at him not to hold the door just because she was a woman. He replied, "I'm not. I'm holding it because you're old." Story 2. Worked at a pizza shop as a delivery driver when I was younger. The shop was owned by 3 extremely polite, professional, and hardworking Russian men, 2 brothers, and a cousin. I took a delivery just down the street, maybe a tenth of a mile. The guy comes out angry, ranting about how they shouldn't have someone with such a heavy accent taking orders because nobody can understand what the fuck he's saying, and he just wants his order correct. I told him I'd pass on the message. I went back and told the owner who had taken the order about the guy's complaint. Without hesitation, the owner called him and said, "If you don't like the way I speak, you can fuck off and order from somewhere else since you were too lazy to drive 30 seconds to place the order in person." He ended the call with, "Do you understand my English now?" Story 3. An older guy in a pizza shop was yelling at someone because they parked too close to the shop, meaning he had to walk farther. He was genuinely mad that someone who arrived before him got a closer parking spot. The person ignored him for the most part until he started calling them names. Then, they looked at him and said, "Oh, go make a Facebook post about it." Story 4. About 25 years ago at an expensive steakhouse in Dallas, a couple of middle-aged women were led to their table by a young waiter. The restaurant was surprisingly empty at the time. A few minutes after looking over the menu, the waiter approached them to ask if they were ready to order. I don't know what triggered it, but one of the women suddenly started yelling. The waiter, remaining composed, responded with something along the lines of, "I don't have to put up with your attitude," and walked away. Not even a minute later, a tall, older man with a perfectly trimmed white beard, impeccably dressed in a cowboy outfit, hat included, approached their table. This man looked like he meant business. His presence alone commanded authority. He didn't need to say a word to make himself known. You just knew he was the owner. He crouched slightly to be at eye level with the women, speaking to them in a low, firm voice. Though I was about 20 feet away, I vividly remember what happened next. After a brief and quiet exchange, he stood up with an imposing presence, maintaining eye contact as he delivered his final words. "I'm going to bring the waiter back, and you will apologize to him, loudly and publicly, just as you berated him. If you choose not to, I will personally remove you from the premises." The entire restaurant fell silent. Every patron turned to watch, as if a classic Western showdown was about to unfold. The woman looked stunned, unable to believe that the owner was siding with the waiter, and worse, that everyone was watching her next move. With a mix of anger and defeat, she slammed her napkin on the table and huffed, "Fine, bring him back," as if trying to salvage some dignity. The waiter returned, and she begrudgingly complied. Throughout the ordeal, he remained professional, showing no sense of triumph or arrogance. He simply accepted the apology, and business carried on as usual. Story 5. We were at Disney World for a club trip back in high school. My brother, some friends, and I were waiting in line for Space Mountain. At one point, my brother got briefly separated, literally for a minute, after getting distracted by something in the ride queue. When he tried to rejoin us, only 2 families had ended up between us, but the guy directly behind us wasn't having it. He started physically blocking my brother, pushing him back and refusing to let him through. We tried to explain, "Dude, he was just looking at something for a second. He's with us and has been in front of you this entire time." But the guy was insistent, aggressively shoving my brother back. Just then, a cast member happened to be walking by. We told them that the guy behind us was physically putting his hands on my brother, and without hesitation, they ushered him out of the line immediately. LMFAO. The best part? His family didn't even react. They just stayed in line like nothing happened. Story 6. I was in line, about the 4th person back, when this old lady was holding up the checkout at Bed, Bath & Beyond. She had a pile of expired coupons, not just recently expired, but over a year old, and was demanding they still honor them. Her excuse? She didn't notice. The guy behind her, with a thick New England accent, decided to chime in. "Guy, just show him your special privileges card." Old lady, "I don't have a special privileges card." Guy, "Why don't you have one?" Old lady, "I don't know." Guy, "Do you think that's because you don't have special privileges?" Old lady, blank stare. The entire line busted out laughing. When she finally realized the guy had just roasted her, and that there wasn't a damn thing she could do about it, she just turned around and walked out. The guy calmly put his stuff down, and the cashier, still laughing, told him she was giving him 50% off on the sheet set he was buying. Dude was a legend. Story 7. About 25 years ago, I worked at a family-owned sub shop. One night, a very drunk guy stumbled in and rudely demanded half an Italian. He didn't specify if he meant a cold cut, steak sub, or anything else. After some frustrating back and forth, it kind of seemed like he was asking for a cold cut, so we made it and handed it over. He paid, barely able to keep his eyes open, but that didn't stop him from being loud, aggressive, and belligerent about everything. He had a history of being an annoying customer, but this was on another level. After paying, instead of leaving, he just shuffled a couple of feet away from the register. The next customer stepped up to order, but as they were talking, the drunk guy very sloppily unwrapped his sub at the counter, completely deconstructing it. He started flailing his hands around in anger, tossing shredded lettuce and tomato everywhere, including onto the poor customer next to him, while slurring, "Is fucking shit. Isn't what I order, goddammit. I want a fucking half Italian." Mid-sentence, the owner vaulted over the counter, grabbed the guy, bent him over, and, using his head as a battering ram, literally threw him out the side door. The whole thing happened in about 10 seconds. The owner then casually walked back and finished taking the next customer's order like nothing had happened. It was like watching Uncle Phil throw jazz out of the bank's house on Fresh Prince. Absolutely glorious. Drunk asshole never came back. Story 8. I once worked as a barista at a coffee shop, and there was this one woman who was constantly rude to me. After COVID started, once the quarantines were lifted, my boss had to step up and help out since there were almost no other workers besides me. That's when he finally realized how truly awful some customers were. Before, he had just managed the shop without actually dealing with people. One day, while he was venting to me about rude customers, I mentioned this woman and how she treated me. I asked if I could refuse her service, and without hesitation, he said, "Yes, sure. Go ahead. If she has a problem, just send her to me." The next day, she came in as usual and demanded her coffee. I just looked at her and said, "Nah, I'm not giving you anything anymore." She immediately started cursing at me, so I pointed her toward my boss, knowing full well he had my back this time, and that she wasn't getting shit. Oh, and by the way, that was the only coffee shop in the mall. If she still wanted her machine-made coffee, she had to walk outside and go a lot farther just to get it. Story 9. I used to have a coworker who was a little strange. Every Friday, we went to the same barbecue joint, and without fail, my coworker would order a wagon, no wheel. The cashier, usually someone different each week, never knew what he was talking about, so he'd have to explain that he wanted a chuck wagon sandwich without the bun. This went on every single week for a year. One day, as we were getting our drinks, a guy was inspecting the new soda dispenser. He asked us how we liked it. We said it was nice, and he thanked us. Turns out, he was the owner of the place. Without missing a beat, my coworker immediately started ranting about how the owner needed to hire smarter people to work the register. The owner, now curious, asked what he meant. My coworker explained that the staff never knew what a wagon, no wheel was. The owner blinked and asked, "What the hell is a wagon, no wheel?" My coworker proudly explained. The owner sighed, shook his head, and loudly said, "Jesus Christ, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. What kind of idiot thinks he can just make up names for things that aren't on the menu?" Then, looking my coworker dead in the face, he asked, "Are you some kind of moron, pal?" My coworker stammered that he wasn't. The owner cut him off, then quit saying stupid shit to my staff. "Order off the menu or get out." We ate our lunches, and from that day on, my coworker never ordered a wagon, no wheel again. Story 10. I work security at a factory. The security company was contracted and not part of the factory itself. The third shift foreman was the son-in-law of the big boss, and a real piece of work. He would constantly park in the fire zone right by the building. I wrote it up in my daily reports for a few nights, but then one night, he stopped me. He basically told me that since he was Mr. Big's son-in-law, he could park wherever the hell he wanted. And if I wanted to keep my job, I had better stop writing him up. Okay. The next night, my supervisor came by for inspection and saw his car parked in the fire zone. She asked why I hadn't written it up, so I told her the story. She wasn't having it and told me to keep writing it up every single time. Now, I was stuck between the third shift asshole and my supervisor. That evening, the third in command of the factory, who also oversaw security, came in to grab something. He was a great guy, always stopping to chat with us. He asked how things were going, so I told him about my problem. He listened, then smiled and said, "You should write it up every time you see it. But don't worry, after tomorrow, you won't see it again." The next night, the third shift asshole wouldn't even look at me. And his car? Never saw it parked in the fire zone again. Story 11. I worked at a local grocery store for about 7 months. It was my first job ever, and the only reason I left was that I was finally moving in with my grandma. It was about my third to last day, around 10 p.m., and I was training one of the new hires. She was doing great, moving through everything like she'd worked there her entire life. I was really just giving her produce codes and helping out when the system decided to act up. Then this lady comes through with her groceries for the week. The new hire, let's call her Jane, asked for her loyalty number and went through the standard small talk questions. The customer responded with bland, clipped answers in that tone, the kind where you just know she sees you as beneath her. Jane caught on quickly and just focused on scanning, handing items to me to bag. Soon, the transaction was done, the lady had paid, and Jane and I both wished her a good night. Jane turned to the next customer. "Jane, hello? Do you have a phone number with?" Customer, "Did you put my phone number in?" All of us, including the people in line behind her, were completely thrown off by how fast she snapped at Jane. Flustered, Jane stammered in, "I can't remember," and looked at me for help. Now, there is a way to check if we entered her number, but in the moment, I completely blanked, mainly because this woman was glowering at us like we had just committed a crime. The conversation went like this. Me, "I can't remember either. I'm so sorry about that, ma'am." Her, "Well, get it on my number." Me, "Okay, just so you're aware, the only way to do that is to refund the entire transaction and scan everything back in." She immediately handed me her receipt. Her, "All right, I'm willing to do that." Me, "Sorry, but we can only do refunds up front. Here, let me get the manager for you." I went to grab the manager, who was cleaning the other registers. She took over, and I went back to Jane. Meanwhile, this woman was not being quiet about her complaints. I shouldn't have to babysit everything they do. Maybe if your cashiers weren't so incompetent. Jane definitely heard those nasty comments, and the customers behind the woman tried to distract her, which somewhat worked. Now, our manager? She only worked 1 day a week. This job was just a second gig for her, and she was done with this woman's bullshit. Manager, yes, you shouldn't have to babysit their every action, but that cashier? She's new, and as a clear regular, you should have known that. I'm not going to stand for you belittling my cashiers, so if you keep being snippy, I'll bite right back. Oh, and by the way, this transaction is already on your phone number, so your little hissy fit was for nothing. Oh, and those 4 Mountain Dews. You didn't pay for those. I gained so much respect for that manager that night. And I hope Jane is still going strong because she went through so much unnecessary shit that night. For clarification, it was Jane's mistake that the Mountain Dew didn't get scanned, but she was new, and sometimes the quantity button just stops working. Still hilarious that because the woman chose to be a raging asshole, she lost out on free stuff. Story 12. Not a Karen, but a Kevin. Years ago, I was at my regular karaoke bar, which just so happened to be hosting a class reunion for my high school, class of '82, the literal last of the baby boomers. The bar always did trivia first, then karaoke, and I was good friends with the guy who ran both. These boomers were loud and obnoxious the entire time. Trivia ran late because my friend had to keep repeating himself and asking them to quiet down. By 8 p.m., they were already drunk and sloppy. So, karaoke started almost an hour late. Usually, my friend did the first song to adjust levels and set things up, but he was so pissed and exhausted from dealing with these boomers that he just let me go first and didn't even bother fine-tuning the sound. He just cranked up the volume to try and drown them out. I was 30 seconds away from finishing my song when one of the boomers stumbled up on stage and tried to yank the mic out of my hand to drunkenly shout, "Class of '82." Except, what actually came out was "Class of '80, OOF, because I punched him in the gut while wrestling the mic back. We both fell off the stage and started scrapping over the microphone. My friend jumped in, trying to save his $400 mic because he had just replaced it. So now, all 3 of us are rolling around on the floor, fighting over a damn microphone. Then I feel a hand on my shoulder. I get lifted off the ground and set back on my feet. I turn around to see who grabbed me, and it's this giant boomer, at least a foot taller than me, and I'm average height. He had his fist cocked back, clearly expecting me to fold and start apologizing. Instead, I patted my face in a dare for him to hit me. He hesitated, then muttered, "You're not worth it," and tried to walk away. By this point, the bouncer had arrived and was sorting things out. Big Boomer tried to pin everything on me, but the bouncer had seen everything. He immediately kicked out the drunk guy and told Biggie that he had to leave too, since he threatened me. Big Boomer wasn't having it and started arguing, insisting that I should be kicked out too. The bouncer just turned to me and said, "I saw everything. You're not in trouble, but just step outside until I get these fucks out of here. Then you can come back in." I went outside to cool off and have a cigarette. One of my friends followed me and asked what had happened, right as Big Guy and his wife were walking out. I looked him dead in the eyes and said, "It's getting late. The old people have to go home." He immediately started blustering and talking shit, but everyone outside started yelling at him to get lost while his wife desperately tried to drag him away. Eventually, he gave up and left. When I went back inside, I ran into my uncle. Turns out, he was there for the reunion too, but we hadn't seen each other in the crowd until now. Now, my uncle was a sheriff's deputy. He pulled me aside and said, "I saw what happened. I know that big guy. He's a corrections officer. I'll have a chat with his boss on Monday about what he did here." Never got a follow-up, but I like to think his boss made him feel real small. Story 13. I used to work at a fancy natural foods and vitamin store during the summer between college. We had a lot of Karens. Think gluten-free this, allergic to that types. One of our most popular items was gluten-free bread from a local bakery that made insanely good stuff. Every time we got a shipment, it would sell out within hours. Deliveries usually came in Tuesday and Friday mornings, and most of our regulars knew this. Enter Karen. She comes in Thursday night, aka zero chance we have any bread left. She looks around for maybe 30 seconds before storming up to me and barking the name of the bakery. Not even a question, just a demand. I told her where the bread would be, but also that it was very likely sold out. She barely acknowledged me before snapping, "Check in the back." Now, this was a small store. We didn't have a stockroom, and we definitely didn't keep local, perishable deliveries in what little backstock we had. But I knew better than to explain this to her, so I went to double check in the back, aka stood there for a minute doing nothing. I came back empty-handed, and she immediately demanded to speak to a manager. So I got my manager. He told her the exact same thing I did. Finally, she accepted that she wasn't getting her bread that night. We told her we usually get deliveries Friday mornings, so if she came back early tomorrow, we'd probably have some in stock. Friday night, round 2. She comes in at 7 p.m. We opened at 8 a.m. She demands her bread like she owns the store. I'm not even sure if she recognized me, but we went through the exact same routine as the night before. I apologized. I checked in the back. I told her we sold out before my closing shift even started at 2 p.m. She lost it. Cue another escalation to the manager, another meltdown, and another dramatic exit. Without her bread, obviously. We thought that was the end of it. Nope. The next day, the bakery called us. Apparently, they had received complaints from a customer claiming we were refusing to sell her their bread. My manager explained what actually happened, and the guy on the phone busted out laughing. Turns out, this lady had already been banned from their bakery for causing a scene and throwing things at employees. She had been going store to store harassing every place that sold their bread in the exact same way. A little while later, my manager officially banned her from our store. The next time she tried to come in, I got to witness the exact moment she realized her actions had consequences. Her face dropped. She stood there in shock as the weight of reality hit her square in the face. The best part? A few months later, we found out she was the ex-wife of the owner of the bakery. Story 14. Back in college, I had a part-time job at a call center for a cell phone company. Most of the calls I handled were either minor tech issues or billing problems, usually from people who didn't pay their bills on time and had their service suspended. A lot of these customers had terrible credit, which is why the company only gave them a very specific type of contract, one with strict limits on how much they could owe and how long they could go unpaid before their service got cut off. Partly, this was to protect them from racking up huge bills they couldn't afford, but mostly, It was because the company knew from their credit score that they were a terrible financial risk. No business wants some broke dumbass racking up thousands of dollars in charges over months when they clearly can't and won't pay. Enter Karen. This woman calls in, furious, demanding that I immediately reactivate her service. I pulled up her account, saw what was going on, and patiently explained the situation. Her bill was overdue, and if she wanted her line reactivated, she simply needed to pay her balance. That's when she lost it. She demanded to know how a total nobody like me dared to tell her, a successful and very important entrepreneur, what to do with her money. She ranted about how my incompetence was costing her business because her wealthy clients couldn't call her. I was 19 at the time, and I admit I lost my cool. I told her, "Ma'am, I'm literally a college student working a part-time job, and even I have a better credit score than you. Unlike you, I understand that paying my fucking cell phone bill is my responsibility. I also know how to read a contract before signing it. No important entrepreneur has a $150 limit on their cell phone plan, and if for some inexplicable reason they did, they'd make sure to pay it on time every month." She flipped out and demanded to speak to my supervisor. At that point, I was so done that I didn't care if I got fired. So, I handed my headset over to my supervisor. He listened to her ranting and raging, put her on hold for a second, and checked with me. Then, in the most glorious moment of my call center career, he promptly told her to fuck off. He said, "Ma'am, the only way your service gets suspended is if you're more than a month late on your payments. That's completely on you. Stop wasting our time pretending to be some VIP while refusing to pay your bill. If you were as successful as you claim, you wouldn't be this broke. Pay up or stay disconnected." Then, when she tried to argue, he hung up on her. And just like that, he silently handed me back my headset and walked away, like Wolverine striding away from an exploding helicopter. Story 15. I was working as a videographer for a business conference, a gathering of middle managers posturing for executive positions. The event was held at a luxurious tropical beach resort, and everything was extravagantly over the top as a display of wealth. Our client, my boss's cousin and the ultimate head honcho of the conference, told us we could eat the food provided for attendees. The spread was amazing, so my crew and I happily helped ourselves during one of the meal breaks. Cue random self-important asshole. One of the attendees noticed we weren't in suits and ties and immediately assumed we didn't belong there. He stormed over, puffed up with importance, and announced, "I'm part of the steering committee for this closed event, and that was the last meal you'll get away with stealing. If I see you here again, I'll contact hotel staff to have you arrested." We just nodded and let him have his moment. Fast forward to later that evening. We had an interview room set up after dinner, recording interviews with the event's organizers and key attendees, supervised by our client. And guess who was next in line for an interview? Mr. Steering Committee himself. The moment he stepped in and saw us behind the cameras, his face dropped. He instantly realized that he had threatened the very people his boss had hired, people working for his boss's cousin, no less, for no other reason than the fact that we weren't dressed like we were sucking up for a promotion like he was. Did he apologize? No. Did his shiny, bald head start sweating profusely under the studio lights? Oh, absolutely. We made sure to deliberately overexpose his head in the footage and had frequent technical difficulties to drag the interview out as long as possible. Afterward, when he left, head honcho sensed the tension and asked what was up. We told him the story. By the next morning, Mr. Steering Committee was removed from his position and asked to leave the conference. It would have cost him nothing to just mind his own business. Meanwhile, we spent the rest of the week filming sessions until 3:30 p.m. and then partying like rich people at a luxury resort every night, all while getting paid. Asshole really missed out. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, activate the notification bell, and share a similar story or anything you'd like to say in the comments. See you next time.